All right, so this week's sermon is a sermon for white people on the MLK holiday weekend. I'm addressing other white people this morning as white people of faith need to reflect on and learn about some things in order to help create the beloved community that MLK talked about all the time. And this morning, when I am speaking about we, I am talking about we as white people of faith, we as white Unitarian Universalists. And I want to point this out this morning because I was in a conversation this week where a person of color pointed out to me that we need to be careful how we use the term we in our Unitarian Universalist settings. Because sometimes we use we and mean a collective Unitarian Universalist group of people, and yet there may be people of color in that group whose experiences or understanding of the things or the concepts or the experience we are discussing might be very different. So I want to make sure that we're covering that this morning, that we is us as white people of faith, white Unitarian Universalists. We all have the experience of being left out, the feeling of not being included. One of the earliest experiences I remember of not being included is when I was playing Little League. Every year there would be a vote to choose the best players in the league to be on our travel team. And that travel team would be the team that would engage in the worldwide tournament that would eventually end up with teams playing in Pennsylvania for the Little League World Series. So my last year of Little League, I was confident I would be on this team, but I did not make it. And it was doubly devastating because it forced upon me a realization that not only was I not good enough, I was also not popular enough. Because after the obvious head and shoulder above all the rest of us kids, the rest of the team got onto the team usually by a popularity contest. Who was well liked, which group of people wanted to be in there, and so on. So I was left out twice. I was left out on skill and I was left out on popularity, and I was devastated. My dad, however, made me attend all the games this team played and cheer them on. And it took until the third game before I could spend time paying attention to the game and not spend all my energy trying not to cry in front of everybody due to the shame of not being included, not making the grade, not being liked, not being good enough. This feeling would come back as it comes back for everybody in certain experiences over the years. You know, high school friends going out together and not calling to include you and tell you what was going on. You can relate. I'm sure you can relate. Most people have an experience of being left out. Many people develop anxiety about it, so much so that it has its own acronym, FOMO, fear of missing out. Yet for us, white people, our anxiety or experience of being left out, or a fear that we are missing out on something we deserve to be included in or deserve to experience, is just that. We will be left out this time. What we don't experience usually is being wiped out or erased. Whitewashing is something white people don't experience. We are not eliminated. Whitewashing is the removing of people of color from history and culture. Gets its name from the whitewash mixture of water and salt and lime applied to wood and brick and stone surfaces as an antiseptic used to inhibit bacteria in barns and coops and other such areas. Whitewashing glosses over the difficulties of our racist history and includes things from not mentioning the plague of lynching in history books to casting white actors in non-white roles in movies and television. Whitewashing was brought to the forefront of my attention once again the last few months as I have been preparing for the next meeting of a minister's study group to which I belong. Over the last 2 years, in response to the call of the UUA to dismantle white supremacy in our association, our group has decided to focus on topics at our gatherings that are anti-racist and about dismantling white supremacy. And our topic for this spring's gathering will be Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism, one of the most concise definitions I've seen, is media that explores futures for Black individuals in the Black community. Afrofuturism recenters the experience of African and African diasporan people. Comes from an essay by Mark Derry called Black to the Future, published in 1994. Because it deals with the future, SF, fantasy, post-apocalyptic things, we see it a lot in terms of science fiction and fantasy books and movies and so on. The entire concept caught me a little off guard, but has a simple and profound disturbing element of white supremacy. Not only do we erase Black people and their experience from history, we don't even put them in our imagined futures. Think about it. The Hunger Games, 99% white. Maze Runner, 99% white. Star Trek, lots of aliens and diversity, even green and blue people, but not a real major Black protagonist until Michael Burnham in the new Discovery series. Star Wars is the same. Again, lots of aliens, even robots and Wookiee main characters. And yes, there's Mace Windu and Lando Calrissian, but not really a Black main character until FN 2187 or Finn, who notably as a Black character starts off even without a name. I realized I was a big fan of two major works of Afrofuturism after learning about it. The Black Panther Marvel comic book and the Parable series of novels by Octavia Butler. During her lifetime, Octavia Butler was probably the only Black woman making a living solely from writing science fiction. Her body of work is largely Afrofuturist. My favorite work of hers is also my favorite work of the post-apocalyptic genre, The Parable of the Sower. Much of the story's power comes from the immediately recognizable world of contemporary urban America. Cities decaying due to neglect, wealth super concentrated into the hands of a few and the corporate entities. Workers for the corporations are as much slaves as employees. A government useless, powerless to make anything substantially better, and ripe for takeover by a dictator-type leader with the support of religious fundamentalism, especially Christianity. Sound familiar? When the breakdown of civilization finally happens, a young Black woman from LA named Lauren goes on a quest. Gathering like-minded allies and supporters, Lauren is a hyper-empath and acutely feels the emotions of others, which is both blessing and curse. She becomes a prophet, and we are told the story through her journal entries. She creates a new religion and new spirituality. She calls this Earth Seed, and her poems become the Earth Seed scripture. Her followers take the sacred text seriously, as one reviewer said, because, quote, they appeal to her followers on several levels simultaneously: the intellect, the emotions, and most important, the will. Earthseed is a naturalist and atheistic faith. God in this religion is change, the constant evolutionary, never stagnant process of change. Parable of the Sower doesn't just have a Black protagonist and not just a Black woman protagonist, but this character is a seer, a mystic, a prophet, the leader of a new and growing community that literally puts her at the center, not only of the story, but of the experience of those around her. Black Panther, I knew as a comic book as a child, and I remember liking it chiefly because of the animal element and the way that was connected to the character, the way I thought it was cool that Spider-Man was connected to an insect. It wasn't until the movie was made that I realized Black Panther was different on many levels that were probably a lot more important. The hero's power comes from ancient ways, from an African society so far advanced that they hide their knowledge and even their existence from the outside world. The white world is decentered in Black Panther. In fact, the few white characters in the story are villains or what amounts to a minor sidekick, kind of like an even less important Robin to the Black Panther's Batman. James Baldwin took the title of his 1963 book, The Fire Next Time, from a line in the song Mary Don't You Weep. God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. He tells the story of being a young man in Harlem and becoming a preacher, but then leaving it behind because, as he says, the unmitigated arrogance and cruelty of Christianity and its remarkable arrogance that assumed that the ways and morals of others were inferior to those of Christians. Like Loren in the parable of the sower, he leaves behind an old faith in hopes of creating what Star Wars called a new hope. He talks about what we can do, and he means black and white and all people together. If we, he says, and I mean the conscious whites and the relatively conscious blacks who must, like lovers, insist on or create the consciousness of others, do not falter in our duty now, we may be able, handful that we are, to end the racial nightmare and achieve our country and change the history of the world. Baldwin's book was part of the flood of awareness that occurred in white America during the civil rights movement. With fire hoses and attack dogs and bombing of churches that killed black schoolgirls on TV, and Dr. King giving sermons and speeches that were highlighted on the news programs and in the magazines, we white people, through the newer media, became more aware of the depth and depravity of slavery, Jim Crow, and how we treated black people. Today, our culture is experiencing the purifying fire. As technology advances and we went from TV to YouTube and live instant video feeds of police brutality and protests, we as white people are once again being asked to experience yet another growth spurt in our awareness and awokeness regarding how we still treat black people in America. Once we see, we can't unsee. Once we learn, we can't unlearn. I am hopeful, however, that the God of change, as difficult as it is for us white people, will bring us to a better place. As the prophet Loren wrote in Earthseed, the child in each of us knows paradise. Paradise is home. Home as it was or home as it should have been. Paradise is one's own place, one's own people, one's own world, knowing and known, perhaps even loving and loved. Yet every child is cast from paradise into growth and new community, into vast, ongoing change. And may that change for us continue to be a dismantling of the white supremacy culture we have created and the creation of the beloved community that Martin Luther King Jr. told us about.